Hello, welcome to Robinson Hall Experts Talk. My name's Laura Saunders, Marketing and PR Manager at Robinson Hall, and today on the 22nd of January we are going to be discussing New Year, New Project. I am joined with David Sawford and Stuart Brown. David Sawford is Partner and Head of Building and Project Consultancy. He's worked for Robinson Hall for 29 years and has extensive knowledge of construction methods and building use types, both in design and project management of building works. Stuart Brown is Associate and Chartered Building Surveyor. Stuart has over 40 years' experience in surveying a wide variety of buildings, along with advising on repairs, alterations, refurbishment and extensions, and specialises in party wall surveys. Welcome, Stuart and David.
Thank you, Laura.
So first things first, it's a new year and with it often comes changes. What advice would you give to those who are considering carrying out works to their land or property?
Well, to begin with, it's an exciting time, new project. The main thing is to set out on the right foot and work out what you're trying to achieve. So preparing a detailed brief is quite helpful. If you're not 100% sure on what you're trying to achieve, then obviously you're going to need quite a lot of assistance, and that might be where a feasibility study comes into play in terms of, if you had, for example, a paddock of land and you want to do something and want to see what the options are that are open to you, potentially you could carry out a feasibility study to examine the planning policies and the options available for that piece of land. If you've got a building that you want to refurbish or a farmyard with capability to diversify, then as I say, set out a brief of what you're trying to achieve and speak to a professional. They will be able to advise you on the planning implications and what's feasible and practical, and also what's cost effective.
Yes, key. I agree with that. With the experience I've had, is the initial consideration of what you're really trying to achieve. Spend time on that and not rush that stage. But once you've come to some ideas of what you want, you do want an experienced designer that's able to take your views forward and achieve what you want to achieve on that property.
Thank you. So I've got together a detailed brief. I'm working with an expert. Possibly I've gone down the feasibility study route. Talk me through what happens next.
Okay, so most projects follow a fairly set sequence. From inception, there'll be some sketch scheme drawings prepared. Let's take the example of a building alteration for the purposes of this discussion. So we've got a building alteration, and let's say it's an agricultural barn and you're looking to convert it to a commercial use of some sort.
Yeah.
So you would prepare a site plan and a sketch plan to show how that physical alteration will appear. That will take some consultation with the client, and there'll be some back and forth to get that scheme to be appropriate. There will then be potentially a pre-application inquiry if it's radical, but most of the time it will go straight for planning, which may be under prior approval scheme or otherwise full planning application. Once you've got the planning stage dealt with, then we would help you with the next stages of taking that through from concept and planning approval to work on site and the conversion works, which effectively is working drawings, building regulations application, issuing or appointing a principal designer for CDM regulations.
Yeah.
Preparing specification, tendering the works, unless obviously you may have somebody in mind to do the works, or you may be wanting to do the works yourself, but most clients tend to send it to tender to get competitive prices, prepare contract documents, and then supervision and project management of the project from start to finish.
And it's worth noting that one of our unique selling points at Robinson Hall is that we do have a wealth of in-house departments that can do everything from start to finish.
Yes, absolutely. So the planning department would look after the initial planning and potentially the feasibility study. We would look after the design work, the technical details, specification, contract administration, and that physical work. And then on the example given, potentially a commercial operation, we have a commercial department that would be able to let or deal with lease issues.
Yes, additional to that, with the recent issue at Grenfell and the fire, there is the Building Safety Act that now applies to all building projects, and a client should appoint someone as a principal designer. We can fulfil that role. Sometimes if you're doing alterations, extensions to existing properties, they're nearby to other properties, and the Party Wall Act might apply. We can provide you in-house advice and skills on the application of the Act, and get notices issued on your behalf and deal with neighbours to resolve any problems that are coming out of the Party Wall Act.
So the Party Wall Act, that's only relevant when there's a wall next to where you require any works. Is that right?
That is a common misconception. The Party Wall title in the Act has a little word and etc. in the middle of it, so it covers other things. Normally we think of Party Wall as a wall between, say, two semi-detached houses, but the Act applies with foundations that are close by to next door, and also building along boundary lines. So it's a bit wider than the normal understanding of a party wall, and therefore that's why you require advice from a specialist.
Yeah, just actually on that, you mentioned foundations close to a building, to a neighbouring building, but it's not necessarily just foundations, it's any excavation work within that zone. So it could be for drains being put in, or tanks, rainwater harvesting tanks, or anything else within that zone where you're digging close to or deeper than the foundations of the adjacent property.
I see. So are there any changes on the horizon that anyone that's looking to start a new project should be aware of?
Yes, well, there's always changes in national policy. The main change that's coming forward from our rural base is there is a review occurring this spring on permitted development rights for agricultural farms. We don't know exactly what's in that review yet, but it has been published that there will be a review of permitted development rights. So we're watching that space carefully, and we'll be advising and following up on that.
And I guess if you're unsure whether your project would fit into permitted development rights, it's worth consulting a professional like Robinson Hall straight away, and we can obviously talk you through the options available.
Absolutely. The project may or may not fall under permitted development rights. It may or may not require planning, and we've actually done other podcasts dealing with some of the planning issues and thoughts. But ultimately, it's important that you identify what the end game is of what you're trying to achieve, and it may not be necessarily the best course of action to go straight in with a planning application. It may be that a certificate of lawfulness or a planning in principle application might be the best course of action, so that you meet the policy demands for what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, so we've talked about principal designers and the Party Wall Act. What other requirements are crucial when it comes to carrying out any building works or land works?
One that often gets forgotten about by clients is the Building Regulations Act, and basically making sure that you put a submission in, a full plan submission ideally, so that either the approved inspector or the local authority check the plans to ensure they meet the Building Regulations Act. We see quite a number of instances where people have done alterations without having building regulations approval, and it can cause problems when you come to sell a property or lease a property or the like, where solicitors will be sifting through the paperwork. So it's important to make sure that that gets covered off.
What does the Building Regulations Act and the documentation with it, what does it involve exactly?
Well, the building regulations is really the technical standards that a development has to comply with. What you could say is the nuts and bolts of a building, how it all stands together. Big key parts of that, things like the structure, make sure that the foundations are adequate, the walls are properly constructed, the roof is properly constructed. And the big thing that seems to be pressing, and I've seen over my experience where the regulations have changed most over the last 40 years, is the thermal efficiency of a building. When I started out, we hardly put any insulation in a building at all, nothing in the cavity walls and very little in the roof. Things have changed dramatically from that stage, and we are heavily insulating buildings, and with the zero agenda of various governments, that can only get more and more detailed, and that is a critical thing in the design, and that is set out in the building regs, where we have to achieve various standards for thermal performance of roof, walls, floors, windows, etc.
Would the builders use that drawing or set of drawings when it comes to actually physically building the property as well?
Yes, I mean the package for going onto site, a builder has the detailed working drawings, which includes the building regulation application details, but also a detailed specification which sets out what is the standards of the workmanship and quality of the work we expect, but also what is required in considerable detail. A typical specification would run from 20 to 40 pages on a project going through trade by trade, saying exactly what is expected of the builder when he prices and also when he builds.
I think that's a really important point, because we see particularly domestic clients sometimes struggle and sometimes get caught when they have used a designer to get planning consent and then have gone straight to a builder for a price. That price could be based upon very basic planning drawings, not working drawings, without specification, and that is a recipe for disaster. My colleagues deal with expert witness and issues, construction issues, which quite often are encountered where people set out on the wrong foot. They have plans, have a price, but don't actually understand what that price encompasses in terms of a detailed specification, because the builder's price will be based upon assumptions rather than accurate drawings showing how it's to be constructed and what specification or finishes is to be included. So I would say it's very important, setting out on a new project, to have that very clear. The other very important point is to make sure you have a formal contract that sets out the terms of the arrangement, insurance details, retention. Effectively, it sets out every course of action and a remedy should there be any issues.
Part of that contract documents is the specification and the drawings, and they have both been prior priced by a builder, so that you know what you're getting for the money that he is going to charge. Because often, if it's not set out in detail, it leads to misunderstanding where the person having the work carried out expects it all to be done, and the builder might have left those sections out of his pricing. So we like to have that full detailed specification and price before the work starts, so that there is less opportunity for misunderstanding and disputes.
And I guess if you weren't to go down that road, then you're going to only end up with more costs and potentially a lot of nuisance, because builders aren't exactly going to be sure on what goes where. Obviously, we can come in with our project management service.
Absolutely. You might, going back to your point, yes, you run the risk if you don't have a full specification and technical drawings and go straight to a builder. You run a risk. You might have a builder that's very reputable, very experienced, and does understand what your requirements are and has included it. But our experience and experience of a lot of particularly domestic clients is that they're not experienced in construction, and if you have the wrong builder, then it's an opportunity that the builder can sometimes take to increase their profit margin using the grey areas. So it's very important to have detailed specification, detailed drawings, so that everybody's clear on what's included and what's not.
We've talked a lot about the services that we offer and the fact that we can help from start to finish. Are there any other points to make before we conclude?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I don't think there's any specific points other than really to say talk to a professional at an early stage in the project. It's important that the aim and the brief is detailed, so that you don't embark on a project and then have to take a swerve later on when you find that there are limitation or restrictions imposed either by building regulations or by planners, so that you're starting out and everybody understands where you're aiming to get to.
Good point.
Yeah, on that, I would say that if you're thinking about a project, the first thing, if you're approaching the designer, is you should see examples of his previous documentation on schemes to see what the quality of the drawings are. Worst case scenario is you get a very thin line drawing, which no one knows what's going to be built, and it's very difficult to interpret. And I often come across those in my field as a party wall surveyor. But also, you want to know what they are going to do for you and how detailed the documentation they're going to provide, so that you don't end up with a very thin design documentation which gives a widespread ability for dispute and a misunderstanding feature in the project. And the worst case scenario is when you have problems with your builder on site when you're trying to get the project finished, and there are a lot of differences of opinion which have to be resolved.
Thank you. And I think another point probably just to make is give yourself plenty of time. With all these things, they take longer than you normally expect, especially if you need to get planning involved. So I would start any light bulb moments or any projects that you're thinking of starting soon. I'd start sooner rather than later. As we said, make sure that you involve a professional from the start. Robinson Hall can help from start to finish. Thank you, Stuart and David, for your time today. If you'd like to contact them to discuss your project in more detail, please do. Their contact details can be found on our website. The best place to look for them is the Meet the Team page. As David has already mentioned, we've got other podcasts that we've done on permitted development and planning feasibility. Please have a listen to them and contact us if you have any other questions. I will be launching a range of other podcasts in the future. I've already launched quite a few. Please have a listen to them, and thank you for tuning in, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye. Our podcasts are for informational purposes only and should not be considered as legal advice. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise. The advice and views are from the expert only.